Hello, my name is Brad, and let's answer a question that was posted on Ask an Expert on the Wyzant board. All right, and the question that was posted was this. To what extent did the age of European expansion impact the Chinese? Who benefited more from the seaborne interaction? Explain with examples. First, let's define the time period here. What was the age of European expansion into Asia? Well, it lasted from 1557 to 1901. And in relation to China, we can divide this period from 1557 to 1901 into two periods. One period from 1557 to 1806, and the other period from 1806 to 1901. And from 1557 to 1806, both China and Europe benefited from their trade relationship. There were other losers that did not benefit, but they were other Asians. China benefited. As the Portuguese, the Spanish, the Dutch, and the British came into Asia, China got wealthy. They gained silver because of these new trade relationships. And because they got wealthy, they were able to finance their wars and actually expand into Central Asia. But after 1806, the situation changed. The trade balance shifted in favor of Europeans. Particularly, the British came up on top. The British and other Europeans defeated the Chinese in a number of wars over trade. The Europeans gained land. They forced China to open up ports for trade against China's will. And Europeans also received other special rights and privileges in China. China lost its wealth in this period. The relationship between Europeans and the Chinese from 1806 to 1901 benefited Europeans more than the Chinese. The relationship between China and Europe during this time continues to negatively affect relations between the West and China today. Let's look at the balance before 1806. If we take a look at this map that is posted here, the darker color is the Ming Dynasty, circa 1368, a full century before Europeans arrive into Asia. And we look at the light pink conquest, we'll note dates such as 1757, 1759. And this is after Europe arrived. So China is getting wealthy. They're gaining a lot of silver from these trade relationships, and they're actually able to expand their territories. So China is becoming powerful, and China is benefiting from the trade relationships that have been established with Europeans. In fact, China is even winning wars. China beat the Dutch in a couple wars that occurred between them before 1806. So China is doing really well here and benefiting at this time. Take a look below China. Take a look south of China, and you'll see this lighter tan color with a name Annam on it. Annam, or Indochina, was a vassal state of China during this period of time, meaning that Indochina was somewhat under Chinese control. That is going to change. This is the balance after 1806. In the 1880s, France and China fought a war, and France beat China in that war and got control of Indochina, which is no longer under Chinese influence. It's now under France's control. And we'll see France has established a sphere of influence in southern China. And it's not just France. The big one I talked about was Britain. And Britain defeated China in two wars over opium, a trade good, the chief of which would have been the First Opium War, which ended in 1842. And in that war, Britain gained Hong Kong. You'll notice that the Brits also have a significant sphere of influence on this map. The Germans also showed up into China in the later periods and took over a port in northern China. The Russians invaded Manchuria in 1900, and you'll see the Russians have established themselves there too. So Britain comes along, and things change in 1806, and then the French, the Germans, and the Russians also decide to expand into Asia and exert influence. And this has a significantly bad influence on China. China started losing its wars. The balance of trade changes. China is losing money. They're losing silver instead of gaining silver at this time. And they've lost land, and they've been forced to open up ports to trade against their will. China is not benefiting from the relationship with Europeans after 1806. So one more time, here it is. From 1557 until 1806, the Chinese benefited greatly from new trade relationships developed with Europeans as Europeans expanded into Asia and the Pacific. In these early relationships between China and Portugal, China and Spain, the Netherlands, and Great Britain, China got wealthy. They gained silver, and China gained additional territories and possessions. But after 1806, this situation changes. China becomes more poor. The trade balance shifts in favor of Europeans. The British and other Europeans defeat the Chinese in wars over trade, and they gained ports. China was forced to open up ports in China to trade against their will, and China also had to grant special rights and privileges to Europeans residing in China. The relationship between Europeans and the Chinese from 1806 to 1901 benefited Europeans more than the Chinese. The First Opium War, which I mentioned previously, ended in 1842 with the Treaty of Nanking. In the Treaty of Nanking, China lost Hong Kong. And this is seen as the beginning of modern Chinese history in China. It's etched in the Chinese consciousness. China knows about it, but scarce an American and nary a European are aware of the Treaty of Nanking in 1842. So this means that China and Europeans and Americans are viewing history from a different lens, from a different viewpoint. When you're viewing things from a different lens or viewpoint, this has a potential to cause conflict and negatively impact your relationship with the other person, or in this case, country. And this continues to negatively affect relations between the West and China even today. Well, I hope that answers the question. Join me again on Ask an Expert.